Welcome back to the Let's Talk Vibes podcast, where we speak soul contracts, illuminating the path to higher understanding. I'm your host, Lauren.
And I'm Yiannah. And today we are lucky enough to have the wonderful Lauren Calvert, who is our fellow soul contract practitioner, a divine healer, and just an awesome, awesome, beautiful soul. Lauren, welcome. We are so happy to have you here.
Thank you both. I'm very, very excited and I appreciate the opportunity to be here.
Yes, well, this week we're going to be diving into the 7-7, which is the number that I have in my physical karma. So, Lauren, where do you have this number in your chart?
I have mine in spiritual karma, actually. So plenty of karma
Okay.
between the two of us.
Yeah. Well, that'll be interesting to compare because I feel like even still, sometimes understanding how that can really show up differently when someone has
Mm.
that in the physical triangle versus the spiritual. It's not always something that I naturally with some numbers I'm like, yeah, this is how it's going to be different. And I feel like the 7 isn't one that immediately jumps out at me. So I'm actually going to be so curious to really compare those experiences to see if there's anything like really notable that kind of jumps out that we can be like, okay, that's a little bit of the difference. That makes sense.
Yeah, it's interesting. I was reflecting on that because with some numbers, it's really clear cut. You
Yeah.
can be like, oh yeah, that's physical world, that's spiritual world. But I guess we're souls on the earth having a human experience, and we can't always separate those things. We try to separate them to understand them better, but really it's all connected. So yeah, I'm sure there are nuances, but I am very interested to see, the difference, as you said, because yeah. I've often wondered about that one myself.
Yeah. Well, the 7-7, what we
Mm.
talk about when this again is going to be in a karmic position for someone, that, well, overall, this is a number that's about working with and healing the heart. So often we can see a lot of, heart wounds. We talk about someone has a heart wound, and that can come from this life, maybe early in childhood. It can come from a past life. So that's a really big marker for this number. But that is not the part I necessarily identify with as much as the other really key aspect of this number, which is the fact that sevens, they tend to hide themselves away, right? What we say is that sevens will feel like there is something bad about them, and that if people see this, they will not be loved. They need to hide this away. So they show up in the world wearing a mask with a facade, and they show their true selves either to one person, a very small group, or maybe to nobody at all. That is the part that I can so see reflected in my experience. So I'm curious for you, do you feel
Mhm.
like you've kind of gotten an equal dose of both, a little bit more of one or the other? How is it showing up for you?
I would say an equal dose of both. So in my experience, typically what you see, as you mentioned, is that, one event or perhaps multiple events in childhood that create a wounding for the inner child. So then that child tends to be like, well, what's wrong with me? And it creates this undercurrent of energy where they perceive themselves as having something wrong with them or as not a good person based on the experiences that have come into their life. And as we know, these numbers, they work with the law of attraction, they pull in these experiences, for the soul to overcome them and grow. And it's not that there is anything wrong with that child, but they needed to have that experience so they could go through the journey of really coming back to, self-acceptance and love of self and healing the heart wound. So in my experience, there was definitely a wounding in childhood. And that did create, and when I found soul contract and I found out about this number, I was like, oh, that makes me feel so much better. And it really explains my entire experience. Um, Predominantly in childhood, I would say there was more that inner child wounding, that rejection, and having experiences come into my life that really reinforce that. As I've gotten older, I'm 40 now, I'm 41 soon. It really explains a lot about how I feel about putting myself out in the world, because there is that fear of rejection or feeling like someone's going to see that I'm a bad person. And it doesn't make sense. You know, you tell this to someone else who doesn't understand this system and they're like, what is she going on about? You know, because logically it doesn't make sense, but it is very visceral. You know, the feeling inside is, you know, it's panic, it's terror, it's like, I may not even survive this if I show this part of myself, because I can't take this rejection, you know, anymore. Yeah. So I hope I answered your question. I do go off on tangents.
We
Hey, I
love a
love
good
it.
tangent.
Good
Well,
tangent. Okay. I'm
you
in the right
know,
place.
it's funny because the 7, right? The 7 is a communication number, right? So when you see it in challenge, that's one of the things that's a marker of the 7, is that maybe communication is a little bit difficult. And for myself, this is something that, you know, when I found the system and I was reading about this, it made me think about the fact that I have um, Mercury and Pisces in my astrology chart. And that's, if you know anything about astrology, that's where Mercury's in its detriment. It doesn't want to be there. It's opposite of its home sign of Virgo. And it's, you know, it's said to be like the Pisces, you know, Mercury Pisces kind of also is itself a little bit of a challenge with communication. You know, it's not a straight line, it's going around in these circles. So I kind of looked at that and was like, okay, well, that's one way to make, you know, communication a challenge, if that's what the 7 would suggest, is, you know, you put that communication planet in detriment and be like, hey, you're gonna have to overcome this. You're gonna struggle with this a little bit. You know, it's a kind of a place where like this is the same theme, you know, in 2 modalities. And speaking of astrology, in astrology, the 7 is Gemini. And this is one of those numbers where I feel like the astrology sign helps you to understand the energy so well, because, you know, with Gemini, we say, hey, it's the twins. Oh, they're two-faced, right? But with this 7, what we understand is that there's the mask and then there's the true self. And so this is really the lesson for the 7. This is the goal of the 7, is to learn how to unify these 2 parts of themselves in order to show up in the world authentically. And I think it can help to give a little bit more compassion in a way to Geminis. If you think about that, that it's like, oh, maybe there's part of what they're showing, or the reason we say, you know, that they are two-faced is like, okay, well, maybe there's just an authentic part of themselves they don't feel safe showing, because that's what it is with the 7. So that's what I love about the system. It can, as soon as you know something about one, like the astrology, you can pull that into your understanding of the numbers, but also vice versa. It can give you a lens to look at the signs in a new way that you hadn't before.
Absolutely. And you know, I'm not as familiar with astrology as you are, Lauren, you know, so I don't know if you do readings, but hey, let me know. But that is something I'd like to deepen my knowledge of. Absolutely. But what I feel like the conscious awareness that you have from understanding this energy really brings in a level of compassion, you know, for, you know, other people, for yourself. And that's the thing, it is really about feeling safe. So it's not that, you know, 7s are putting on this facade just to look good and be liked, although, you know, that's kind of part of it, but really it comes from a vulnerability and a protection rather than, you know, any other place. So it comes from the wounding, so to speak.
Absolutely. And, you know, I think for me, it's so interesting because I really discovered my neurodivergent identity very shortly before my spiritual awakening. And so one of the things that really helped me to be like, okay, yeah, I definitely feel like I am neurodivergent. Sometimes it's harder to pigeonhole myself on exactly which identities, but that what I so identified with was wearing a mask, you know, so that's something we talk a lot about within the neurodivergent community, whether it's ADHD or autism, is masking. And I have these memories of saying that to my mom, maybe when I was still in college, maybe even when I was in high school. Like, I just feel like you're the only person I can show this my truest self to, that everyone else sees this mask. And actually, for me, it's really interesting because in my physical triangle, I have 10-1 in physical goals, and we haven't discussed the 10-1 yet. We're going to, but one thing is that it has this perfectionism energy. So for me, how I see it, for me, is for my personal experience, what I'm trying to hide, the thing that I think is bad, is anything that's not perfect, right? Like I was so trying to be perfect. I was so trying to be the good girl. I kind of knew that there was an expectation of what people expected to see of me. And so I needed to always show up in that way. And anything that was less than the expectation was not good enough. And it was bad. It was bad to not be perfect. It was bad to not show up like people expected. And that's what I was hiding. Anything that would fall short of that. And that's been such, again, the beauty of this system to be able to see how these energies are interacting of, okay, the perfectionism here triggered the hiding here, triggered the feelings of unworthiness here, and it all comes
Yes.
together.
And similarly, well, you know, when you say all of the numbers working together, none of the numbers just, you know, go off and do their own thing, right? It's a dance, it's an orchestra playing a symphony, you know, they all have their part. And, you know, the way they can manifest, it's like endless. There are so many different ways that, you know, things can manifest. But interestingly enough, with my sevens, I have nines in my spiritual triangle. So my sevens were very much linked with disempowerment as well. And so that all played out there. But on your point of perfectionism, I actually, because that is something that I have had through my life, I really do. And I know it relates to the 10-1, but I feel quite strongly that with the 7 energy, that is quite prominent. That is, you know, to the point where I would say that, you know, it served me well in my earlier life when I was an EA, and everything I do would be perfect, and everyone would have everything they need, and everything was done to complete perfection. But, you know, that leads to a lot of stress and burnout, and I've got 6s and I got chronic fatigue and all those sorts of things, right? But there is this, and to the point where too, you know, with the 7, it's like, you know, to even the point of perfectionism, even when, say, I was sick or unwell, and I would just put on my makeup and I would keep going, and everyone would think that absolutely nothing is wrong. It was just, you know, would have no idea, or perhaps how I was feeling inside, because I was able to put on that front and just keep going.
Yeah, absolutely.
See, so for me, I don't have 7s in my birth chart, but I do have it in all my other charts, my phonetic charts, my married name, my current name, everything. My whole life I've had it show up for me. And for me, that whole mask element comes into my spirituality. So in my family, the only person around me that was spiritual and openly talking about God and angels and all that was my mother. And outside of my mother, I had nobody. So when she would talk, I would just eat it up because it like sang to me. And then growing up, and then you're in your 20s and you're in your 30s, and it's like I would attend spiritual events, or I would go to the spiritual church, and my siblings or other people, they'd be like, oh, where are you going? You know, I'd be at a family thing. Where are you going? I'm like, oh, I have something to do. I couldn't tell people because they didn't understand it. They call you weird. They think like, what are you doing? What's this thing what's so important that you're leaving what you're doing? And it's like, I never felt safe outside of my mother to share that, because if somebody's also not on that journey, it's very easy for them to make you feel, I don't know if the word's wrong about it, but different about it. And now I will say over the less than 5 years, I have entered a space where this is my authenticity, right? That 7's all about that authenticity, where I'm like, oh no, this is who I am. Hear me shine. I will roar it from the mountaintops. I am not hiding it. I am not downplaying it for anybody. And like, so I remember one time I was leaving a family event to go to my spiritual church, and my brother, who he's just making fun, you know, he goes, where are you going? And I said, I'm going to church. And he goes, oh, you're going to go to the cult? I said, yes, I am. And I will drink the juice and I will just live life with everybody else. Because now I'm like, I don't care, even the jokes, or even if you're serious, I don't care. This feels so true and authentic to me. I'm going to show up in that. And understanding that 7 energy gives me this, like, not validation, because you don't need that validation, but it is confirmation. Like, I am following my own path. I am doing the thing that feels right for me. And it only has to feel right for me. That's my rant.
Yeah, no, no. Well, I love what you said, because really it is the conscious awareness of the number that helps you to break through it, with the 7, because there is the heart wound aspect there, there is healing, in the fear of being seen. There's always the healing work to do, but also a lot of, well, all the numbers really, first you get the conscious awareness from a reading, or from, reading Nicholas's book, or wherever you may get it from, this
This
podcast.
podcast. Yeah.
Yeah, this podcast, listen to all the episodes. So you have the conscious awareness, and then what you can do is actively parent or manage yourself through them, right? So, and it's often, really what you need to do is the opposite of what you feel like you want to do. So if it is a 7 and there is this fear of being seen, it's do what I just did and say yes to going on a podcast and be really uncomfortable about it. But the more that you do it, the easier it becomes. So I am consciously aware that this is something that I'm meant to work through. It gave me comfort in knowing that, what has happened in my life was exactly what was meant to happen. But if I'm really going to get where my soul planned to go, and where I want to go, where I'm internally driven to go, then I need to work through these things. So it's a little bit of tough love on myself, but the 7s need lots of love, but also it's that, no, you really need to do this, and so it gives you a little bit more drive or oomph in that way.
Well, right. And
Yeah.
part of like what that 7 wants you to come into is that networking aspect, that social aspect. It's like you may even find people just randomly come up to you and tell you just all sorts of stuff about themselves. You magnetize people to you. So doing that work, healing that inner child, coming into your authentic self really helps you get into where you're trying to go, which is this quote unquote public person where you really are putting yourself out there. And you're not just talking to your neighbor and your one friend and your mom. You are really sharing and teaching with large groups of people. So it is so important. If you can't heal that and you continue to do what the 7s want to do, which is major isolation, you're never going to be able to tap into the beauty of this frequency.
Yeah. And, we talk about how, people will come up to you and tell you their life story, right? And I think, again, if you think about with this number, this is the most magnetic number. And if you think also that when you have done something, you are able to, on this energetic level, teach people how to do it, even if you're not actively, playing the role of a teacher, which 7s can do as well. And especially, we've already talked about numbers that are very teacher energies. So even if you're not literally teaching them, just in that presence, right? Just through your presence and energetically, you're able to share that. And so I think that's kind of part of the reason why, because 7s, while they are about a heart wound, it's also very heart centered. And as you heal that heart wound, you have such an open heart space. And, we talked about this with the 13-4. People come to the 13-4 in order to be loved, and they will love you in return. So I think you can kind of put that same perspective with the 7 and say, as you heal your heart wound, people come to you to heal their own hearts. And where 7s are often very scared to show up authentically and to tell their stories, it might take bravery to do that. At the same time, you're putting out the radar, if you will. You're putting out there, I'm a safe person for you to come and express yourself too, because I have this open heart space and I can show you energetically how to heal that heart wound. And so you do have the people who share to you, oh my God, I'm going through this huge thing. Like I had that happen with my mom. We were out to eat and the waitress, she was so lovely. And she starts talking to us about how she's had cancer multiple times and gone into remission and all this stuff. And I was just like, yeah, this is the 7 energy at work. They're just like, this is a place that I can feel safe
It's
and share
safe.
my story. Yeah.
I've had that years ago when one of my children were at daycare. I was actually, about to leave. So I was in the car park and I had one of the daycare dads come up to me and tell me about how his wife had cheated on him and how they were splitting up and how he didn't, know how he in the car park. I'm like, I've got to go to work. I'm really sorry. It's like, if only I knew what I know now and I had a business card. But,
Right.
it's really interesting. So yeah, I am totally the person at that gathering in the corner with the person who is like, feels comfortable that they can sort of offload or, share safely, because the sevens really know the importance of having a safe space so that they can come out of hiding. So they really do provide that for other people so that they feel safe to come and share as well.
Yeah. Now it's interesting thinking about, so in your life, I know, you're a little bit nervous then about coming and being seen here, but would you say that is this because this is maybe a larger platform, or is like that been a big theme in your life where you're like, oh, the public speaking is a no?
Yeah, it's interesting because I've got fives as well, and fives are all about speech. So I had some issues with actually speaking when I was younger, a little bit of stuttering and a few things. But I was thinking about this years ago. I started writing. I would hate to go up in front of the class and do speeches or anything like that. I would hate anyone's attention on me. And part of that really was because of the perfectionism as well. So, I would feel like everything had to be perfect so that I would be safe and no one would, think whatever of me or say whatever. Like, it was so bad to the point where when I was at university and I was doing my degree and I was coming first in all of the subjects because, I worked really hard to be perfect, that, I would get something wrong and I would have everyone laughing at me. So, like it was like, it was a lot to keep up. Yeah, it was a lot to keep up, right? So my, perfectionism was so intense that it was very, very noticeable. Anyway, so it's been a journey, but as life has gone on, I started writing a blog a few years ago, and then I was sort of like, okay, I'm just going to create a website and I'm going to write stuff, but I'm not going to tell anyone about it. And if anyone finds it and it helps them, that's awesome. Even if it just helps one person, whatever it may be. Anyway, and then when I started doing healing work, probably in about, I'm not sure, I studied Reiki and another healing modality previously. It was probably about 2018 or something like that. And I did my first website, and then I sort of started sharing some of my writing. And I would literally post it on, Instagram or wherever it was, and I would feel physically ill. I would literally want to vomit and go and hide under my bed.
Oh my
Like
goodness.
it's that visceral for me. It is so intense internally. And then I'd be just going, come on, so I would literally just make myself do it, right? As time has gone on, that has settled, because obviously now I know about this system. I'm working with the recommendations. I'm doing the healing work. I'm doing all the things. So it got to the point now where, so when you asked me to be on this podcast, it's like my initial reaction was like, yeah, sure. And then I went, I'm not going to think about it again until the day before. Because thinking about it is not good for me. So I'm just going to turn up. I'm just going to show up. So that's one of the things that has helped me. It's like, this energy is my chart. I do need to work through it. And whatever comes to me, I'm going to say yes, and I'm going to show up. So that's sort of been my approach to it. So it does get easier. It's a little bit like a muscle, you work with it and it gets easier each time. And, usually it's like when I get started, I'm feeling quite comfortable. It's okay. I don't feel like, there's a risk of death.
Well,
it is that extreme.
No, I love it. And it's perfect. And it's so you because, okay, so how I met you
Yes.
were assisting in, was it all 3 levels of soul contract training? Or was it just
Yes,
one?
last
It was
year.
all 3. Okay. So you were just this gorgeous woman who appeared on my screen next to Nicholas, and I would always arrange your pictures next to each other. And every time you spoke, it's like you lit up the room. You did. Like you just had this like beautiful, like very easy like energy about you. But what I remember was in level 3 specifically, we were doing some name optimizing, and you were more quiet. You were more like, I'm going to let other people speak. And you were more, how do I want to say this? You spoke when you felt like the need to, but you didn't do above and beyond that. Okay. And I mean that in a beautiful, loving way. And all of a sudden we were doing this name optimizing, and we were so close to figuring out the energies that for this name we wanted to bring in. And from the back, you're like, what if we just add this H or whatever the letter was? And it was like Nicholas made that change, and all of a sudden this beautiful frequencies show up. But that is who you are. You like wait, and then all of a sudden you come out and you've got this beautiful knowledge and it works and you're so connected. And like I felt that from you during all the trainings and in my interactions with you after. And I'm like, God, like she just has like this beautiful, like the way you present yourself. Yes, you may have the perfectionist, but it does not show up. It shows up so authentic, so real from this beautiful place of love. And people feel that. And that's what's so important, right? Especially with the fives. If you have fives in your chart, you're feeling everything. I felt your energy the entire time. I feel it now. But
Thanks, Yiannah.
but it's true. And you radiate it. So I find it very important to share that with you because this is a number that I know is so important to you and working through it, and you're doing a beautiful job. But I want you to know on the receiving end, somebody who's in the presence of your energy, I couldn't tell to save my life. It's just beautiful. It is. It's awesome.
Thank you very much for sharing that. I appreciate
You're
it.
welcome.
What I will sort of say to that is, what was just sort of coming to me as you were speaking was, the perfectionism and everything that was in my earlier life that has sort of shifted into something different, right? Where, because, sevens can be a little bit manipulative, or they are very controlling and those sorts of things, right? But all of that's for safety. But there's a certain amount of the way that they can work when that energy then shifts from coming from protection to having an open heart and wanting to for people to have value and like what's really important here and how can I work with this. It really shifts the way the energy works. So I would say that it sounded to me like what was coming through was, I'm still very careful. I'm still, and I wouldn't say calculated in a bad way, but I really pay attention to the detail, I guess, right? But it comes from the heart space rather than let's make everything look good so no one thinks I'm a terrible person. Right? Which is really where it came from before. It's like this really deep fear, really, really deep fear. I don't really feel that as much anymore. It is definitely dissolving over time, but this is one of those karmas, and I'm sure Lauren can attest to this, that just takes time to work through. And there is, always the element of divine timing and whatever is happening with your other numbers. You can't rush it. You can only be conscious of it and work with what's coming up in your now moment to then, go to the next step.
Oh, yeah. Now, you did touch up on something that we haven't really talked about yet with the sevens, which is that indecision.
Yeah.
Right. So depending on the placement of the seven in your chart, you could be very indecisive for yourself, but very good at helping other people make decisions. Or if it's in the talent position, let's say, you can make decisions and you could figure out what your next steps are. So for both of you having that different placement, how does that show up?
Well, I almost want to just before I answer your question, I want to like expound that this is like mediator energies, right? Like this is like the energy of a mediator, because what they're really good at doing as well. And so especially as you talk to the point about making decisions for others, the seven, it can be very objective. Now, again, whether that you're in touch with that or you're at that point yet or not is depending on your development or the stage in your journey. But in the talent of them, they are able to see things really objectively. It's like the soul of Solomon, people know the story of King Solomon, the two mothers and the baby, and he makes this decision and he's kind of like, this is how we'll know who the real mother is, right? So but that's the way that I always really see about this energy. And something I love about this energy within myself is the fact that I'm able to really see the different points of view. I'm really able to see what it is that you're saying, and I'm able to see, like person A and also person B. And I see exactly where you're not understanding each other. And this is maybe the 16-7 that's in my chart, the translator. I can help this is what they're really trying to say. Let's find this middle ground. And that's what's so beautiful about the 7 is, and this is where the networking comes together, right? You bring things together, whether that's people, whether that's ideas, whether that's a point of view. So to answer your question, Yiannah, yes, I do feel like I have like stepped into that kind of wisdom and that ability to see the sides from a pretty young age. Like I was always told from such a young age, like wise beyond my years. And that was then became part of what I had to felt was the expectation, what I needed to live up to. And the younger that you are, the easier it is to be impressive. But I felt like the older I got, it's like, oh, I have to do more. I can't just do the same things I did and still be seen in this, ooh, wise beyond your years. Ooh, so mature for your age, right? That's one thing at 10 and it's another thing at 30, right? It's like, okay, what do I got to do to keep up with that? Um, and again, going to your question, I am so indecisive for myself, right? So it's like, yeah, I think about this of like, that is the thing that is still testing me. I get decision fatigue. I get so indecisive. It's so hard. And sometimes like I do want that decision to be taken out of my hands. And yet I'll notice the universe is like, nope, there's not, you're gonna have to make the decision. And now I can just be accepting of like, okay, yeah, I have to learn, I have to practice. I can't get out of it by just not having there be a decision, right? It's sort of like right when you think, okay, this is like when it came to applying for new jobs recently, that like there was this one, it was really clear. And then my mom sent me another application that looked interesting, and I was like, dang it, I couldn't just get it where there was no choice that had to be made. I had to make a decision. Like, dang. So yes, definitely both sides where I feel like one super excel at, and then the other where I'm like, yeah, it's a challenge. And sometimes I wish it weren't because it's tiring and exhausting.
So from the being able to see things from both sides point of view, I remember having really big thoughts as a child. This is off the decision, but I'll get to the decision in a minute. As just say, I would look at the world and look at people and go, well, how, I know this person's done something wrong, but how can you judge them? How do you know what's happened in their life? Like there's more to this, so I've always had this part of, like there's more to it, and there's their point of view. And so it's really interesting that I had that thinking at a really young age. And I'm talking under 10, I would be sitting there thinking, well, that, they've got a story, they've got it, we need to know more about that. When it comes to helping other people make decisions, with the 7 energy, I feel like the 7s, they're really good at seeing all of the options. And also I feel like they're really good at being able to see which is sort of not the best one, but feels like the best one to move forward to. But what 7s are really good at are helping people arrive at that decision themselves, really not saying this is what you need to do. It's like, here are all the options, and like, let's and I find the best way to do that is sort of by asking the person questions, and they then
I
arrive
do
at
that
that. It's sort
too.
of like, yeah, it's like you can pull it out. It's like, I can see this, I know this is the way, but this person needs to come to that decision themselves, because essentially what you're doing is empowering them, right? to make that
Yeah.
decision. So I really do feel like 7s have this ability to see the potential in someone, and they can see all of the different options, and they can see all of the benefits, and they can sort of see everything from every perspective. But I feel like they're really good at sort of nudging people in the right direction in a way that isn't controlling, that is just sort of having them to sort of realize themselves. Yeah. But for myself, I've got 6s as well, and they have some issues with decisions. So, there's been plenty of indecision in my life, let's say that. And but I feel like I'm getting better. So with the 7, the more you peel it back, the more you really get to know and love all of the nooks and crannies and creases and lines and everything that makes you up, all of the shadows, all of the bits. It becomes clearer and easier to make a decision over time, but it can still be difficult. Absolutely.
And yeah, we talk about this number, as being the facilitator, that this is the number that is able to facilitate a group without, kind of taking over it. And which I think is such a beautiful energy. And it's so interesting for me to think about how this has shown up in my life, because I, from starting in middle school, I was like a tour guide, right? I would, in middle school, I was sort of the student representative. So the tour would be like led by faculty, and then I was there on the tour as well. And then starting in high school, I would give tours of my high school. And then I did that as a job in college, and I was orientation leader and all of this. So I would always think about, when we talked about facilitating, like I would think about the facilitating the groups that I would do and things like that. And it's so interesting to me, and I can really see, because it's not what I did in middle school. It's not something that I sought out. They asked me if I wanted to do it. And so I really feel like that was the universe being like, you know what? You're going to work on this, and you're not even going to realize that you're working on it, because it's one for me that by the time I found this work at 27, I was like, oh, I feel like I'm not as afraid to be seen. It's the thing that it's so, as you said, Lauren, I love that you did say bringing things into your conscious awareness, because that's what I always talk about as such the benefit of this system, is just by knowing that these patterns exist helps you to get out of them. It's like sometimes you don't even need to do a single one of the recommendations. Just knowing it exists, just being able to then have the words for it to catch yourself doing it is enough to stop it. And then if you want to do more, there's more stuff you can do, but sometimes that is simply all that you need. And so again, it's sort of like, by the time that this system came into my awareness, I'm like, oh, look at all of the things I was doing, all the times you stood up in front of a group. And a lot of times that group is like 30 people, right? That you're really dealing with. But sometimes you stood up in a group of 500 and said, hey, if you have this letter, come outside and meet me. And that's very little to say, but I still stood up with a microphone instead of 500 people and said it. And yes, my heart
Yes.
was like racing. And like, I also remember when I was a tour guide in college, and it was my last year actually, and we were talking about one of the other coworkers having a fear of public speaking, and the boss is like, why would you ever do this job? You have a fear of public speaking. I'm like, I have that fear too, and I do it because I love the connecting with people. I
Mm.
love getting to be that resource. I love getting to share what I'm passionate about. But yeah, I'm always like a little bit terrified at the very, very beginning when I have to be like, get it started. And then I get into my, oh yeah, this is fine. You know what you're doing. No one is, well, maybe they are kind of judging you a little bit, but they're more of judging the school than judging me, right? Like,
Yeah. But you get started and you get in your flow, and normally when you get in there, things, it's
yeah.
funny. I was an aerobics instructor in my late teens, so I literally had groups of people in front of me teaching fitness classes, right? And it's interesting with the 7 energy, because there is that fear of being seen, but at the same time, when there is an opportunity that comes in like that, I would get into that, and I would really enjoy it, and that would really support me to connect with other people and those sorts of things. Obviously, as I've gone on, I don't do that anymore, but that's sort of the energy of where I would like to go in terms of, working spiritually with people, working in groups, etc.
Yeah.
So, but it's interesting because the 7s have that fear, but it's like once they get in there, often it's just getting them into that, then they really start actually enjoying that energy, and it provides so much energy, that connection.
Yeah.
It's funny. I have this little story about this exact thing we're talking about, where I believe this was last summer. It was like Memorial Day weekend. So in the States, it was like the day that all the pools open. Okay. And me and my sister, we have little ones. So we're like, it was a beautiful day. We're going to the pool. And we get to the pool, and of course, you're pale because you've had no sun all winter. And I remember being in the shallow end of the pool with the kids, and my sister says, oh, someone else is going to join us. And in that moment, I was like, why does that person have to come? I feel terrible. Like, I don't feel like my most confident self. I'm in this bikini. And then it struck me. I thought, okay, everyone is looking at me. Like, you feel like everyone's looking at you. And I looked around and I thought, every single person here is also feeling that same exact way. And I remember just cracking up in the middle of the pool. My daughter, she was 1 at the time. She's like staring up at me, like, what's going on with mom? And I was like, you know what? I'm not doing that anymore. Because why should I feel this way when we're all feeling that same exact way? And I remember it was in that moment I released that expectation of needing to look a certain way or to feel a certain way because someone's going to judge me. And I was like, no, I'm done. I am so done with that. And that was a turning point for me. And so as you read and learn about this frequency, you're like, oh, that's what that was. That's what that was. I was experiencing in real time, and it has since stuck with me where I'm like, I don't care. Someone's going to judge you anyway, so have at it. Like I can't care, so being seen now, I'm like, okay, yes. Do I want my hair to look nice and do I want to look presentable? Of course I do. But do I care if at the end of the day it doesn't come together the way I thought? No, I don't. Because you're probably having the same exact emotion. So let's just be free of that and just show up. So it was just this like complete, I want to say life altering, kind of moment. So yeah, it was just
Very
wild.
freeing.
Yeah, oh my God, it
Mhm.
was amazing. I couldn't stop laughing. And then of course my sister's like, "What's so funny?" I'm like, "Nothing."
Just
You
having a
can't.
conversation with myself.
Totally, yes, totally. That's so funny.
But further, I just wanted to mention, Lauren, you mentioned earlier, about the conscious awareness and just knowing about the number really helps you. It's true because you start then seeing it in your life in real time, and you are able to, oh, okay, that's what's happening. And then you are able to sort of reroute, I guess, make modifications, change what you're doing, or put in little actions. And they might be small to begin with, but it's the little things that you do consistently that build up and really start to shift energy, isn't it? So that's how powerful this system is that you have that awareness. You can literally start changing your life immediately after, and it keeps on going. It grows, it gets deeper, and you learn more and more all of the time. And it really does empower you to change your life and do what you're here to do.
And one of the ways that I the phrasing that I use is that I'll use what I know about the numbers as a way to quote unquote interrogate myself. And interrogate is not the best word really, but I just, again, asking yourself that question,
Inquire.
like,
Yeah.
yeah, it's like, oh, am I just being afraid to be seen? It's like, why do I not want to do it? Oh, am I just being afraid to be seen right now? Oh, okay, yeah, that might be coming up a little bit. And the other thing with the 7 is that, it represents like the left foot. And so the left part of the body is going to be karmic. It's more of the challenge. And so it's the idea that you can kind of get a little bit stuck in place. It's like you have this lead foot that you really struggle to move. Right. And so what the way that I can kind of think about it, right, is from the beginning of my awakening, I was always very kind of honing in on, the thoughts in my brain or the thoughts that I have. It's like, what is the voice of my ego and what is the voice of my soul, right? Because we talk about intuition versus maybe like intrusive thoughts or this or that, right? So I was always very aware and questioning those things. Okay, is that my ego, right? So that's the sort of thing that I would sort of say is coming maybe from your ego, right? Because when the 7s, they don't feel safe, your ego isn't feeling safe. And so the ego, we often say, is afraid of change because you just never know. And so it's like I think about that with the 7 as well. It's like, okay, why am I afraid of being seen? It's like, well, that's different, that's scary, I could all of these things. And there's also this sense again with the getting stuck. It's like, oh, why am I not wanting to move forward? Okay, well, change is scary and all of these things. And so it helps me to again identify, where is this coming from? Is this something that I should challenge? And also at times, then you can make that decision. Do I want to just give into this? Because I am just too scared in this moment to do it. But at least now I know why this came up. And now I'm making the choice to say, you know what? I'm going to give into it. And I'm going to let this opportunity pass me by because I literally am just too scared. Or you can look at it and say, well, now I know why that this fear is coming up, and I'm not going to let this opportunity pass me by just out of this fear. Right. So you can at least make the choice instead of just, I don't know why I said no. I just couldn't say yes. I was too afraid to say yes. Well, at least now you know why that was happening.
Getting curious is really important. And one thing I like to do is, okay, what's the worst that can happen?
Yes.
Like
I
literally,
love that.
what is
love that.
What is the worst thing that can happen? I can go on this podcast, I can sound ridiculous, and I'll make Yiannah delete it. I'm joking, it's fine. But what is the worst that can happen? And also I like the analogy, like when you're little and you've got a torch and you're doing like finger puppets on the wall, like, and there's shadows and things, right? And maybe if there is a kid who's a little bit scared of shadows or whatever, they might be a little bit scared, and it's like, oh, that, so big and scary. But when they see it's the torch with some fingers, it's like, oh, that's not so scary. So get curious, like, what is it? Okay. And what is the worst that can happen? And what will happen if that happens, I'll still be alive. I will be okay. You know, it's not the end of the world, you know, but that's how it can feel for the 7 energy. It feels that way. And like I said before, it's a very visceral feeling in the body that can really come up when those situations arise. But if you do get curious and you sort of get comfortable with all the different scenarios and realize that you will be okay at the end of it, then it makes it easier to move forward.
I love that. What's the worst that could happen? I use it all the time because when you actually pose that question to somebody and, you know, they're like, oh my God, I can't believe this has happened to me. Like, I don't know what I'm going to do. I say, okay, what's the worst that could happen? Let's break this down. And then when they give that worst thing that could happen, then you're like, okay, if that actually does happen, is it really that bad? And so many times, more often than not, they're like, no, it's not the end of the world. It's not this mountain that I thought I was going to have to like overcome or face or whatever. And I love that perspective. I feel like it works so well. And it really helps people step out of that fear and that like, okay, if this does happen, at least I know and I can think about how to move forward, you know, because it's not the end of my world. I mean, how many times have we thought about that in our life? You know, so that is just such a beautiful example. And I do recommend and always suggest people try that because it can absolutely put out fires all the time.
And I think I feel like that is definitely really important. I just want to bring in a little bit with the 7 and the needing to heal the heart there. So it's like you do both things at the same time, you know, if there is that element to you. So you want to bring your body to a place where it feels safe. And you're not so much having to sort of actively manage it as much anymore, because it will come to a point where it dissolves. But it's like it's those that work together. It's multifaceted, right? But that can be a really good tool just to help you in the process.
And for me, I feel like the approach that I usually have is not just to say, well, is that bad? But like, okay, and what would you do? So what would you do if that happened? Okay, well, now you know. So that's the worst that can happen, and you're prepared for the very worst case scenario. So let's trudge forward. You know, you already have what you're going to do. So it's not about saying, for me, is it that bad? But just, okay, well, what are you going to do if that happens? So, like for Lauren, where you said, oh, if I totally mess this up, I'll ask Yiannah to delete it. So it's not even, is it that bad? But this is
Just
what
takes
I'm
the
going to
pressure
do.
off.
Yeah, it's like, this is what I'm going to do. If it is the worst that I could possibly be, this is what I'm going to do about it. And so for me, that's where the confidence comes from. It's because for me, it might feel like the end of the world if that happens and I'm
Absolutely.
unprepared, right? So it's like, what are you going to do? Okay, what is the worst case scenario? Okay, let that happen. What are we doing about it? Okay, well, we would do XYZ. Okay, well, then we're set. We know what we're going to do if that happens. And, you know, what is it they say? Hope for the best, prepare for the worst. Okay, we're prepared. So now let's hope for the best.
Yeah, I love that.
Yeah.
Okay, what else do we want to say about the 7 frequency before we close it up?
Final thoughts. Oh my goodness. This really is a number I could talk about so much. I think what I will say is, you know, something I've seen so much as someone who uses TikTok is people share some very vulnerable stories or things that maybe I relate to and I didn't feel confident talking about. And yet you see so many people in the comments say, thank you so much for sharing this. I went through this. I relate to this. And so just to say, it can be very scary to be vulnerable, but the likelihood that you are alone with this is so slim. And yet so many people are thinking they're alone with it. Right. And so if you can find that courage within yourself to share your authentic self, your authentic truth, your message, that thing that you are keeping hidden because you think that it's bad, you think it won't be loved, there are probably so many people out there who need to hear that, are waiting for someone to say it to give them the confidence to step up and own that in themselves. So I think this is such an important time, in our society to be real and authentic. So just know that even in that fear of showing up authentically, you're not alone and that it's worth it.
Yeah, and I don't have a lot more to add. That was beautiful. I just wanted to say that if you do step out into the world in your full authenticity and you are vulnerable, you allow the magnetic energies of the soul to reach out to those people who resonate with you, exactly like Lauren said. So, you know, that is really the key to this number. It is going out there and being vulnerable, but you will attract the people to you that you're here to work with. And then the feeling that that gives when you find those people and you're like, wow, I didn't know I could feel this connected and find such amazing people that I want around me. It's just so beautiful. And then it starts to build that community and your confidence and everything that starts to flow. And then you find you're exactly where you're meant to be.
And it's so freeing to let go of that
Yes.
control, because we talked about that control that we can hold, and you don't realize how much you can actually be feeling that in your body. So
Oh, yes.
the literal weight off that it can take when you let go of that control, and how free and like loose you can feel, is so incredible.
Actually, I find that a lot of people I've read for that have sevens often have like really stiff muscles in their upper shoulders. Like that, you know, that
Yeah.
stiffness is actually translated into the physical.
Oh, yeah.
And I had that for most of my life, and actually I don't anymore. But it's because of that control releasing. So it's really interesting how it also affects the physical.
Beautiful. Lauren Calvert. I'm like,
Which
Lauren, everyone's like, yes.
I know.
Lauren, thank
Happy
you so
Lauren.
much. Yeah. Thank you so much for joining us today. It is always a pleasure with us. And obviously, we would love to have you back again. But why don't you tell our listeners where they can find you?
Okay, probably the best place is at my website, which is beautifulradiantsoul.co. Yeah, everything's on there, how to contact me, all of the things, and some of my writing, because I am sharing that these days
Yes.
more actively. Yes, I actually, yeah. So, that is the best place. Thank you both for having me here and providing such a safe, loving space for me to, you know, speak freely and be myself online.
Yay.
Well, thank you for overcoming that trepidation and allowing yourself to be seen and to be vulnerable. It's so beautiful. And everybody, head over to our Instagram, the Let's Talk Vibes podcast. Let us know what you thought of the episode. Do you have a fear of being seen? Do you relate to that aspect of wearing a mask and struggle to show up in your true self? Or do you really face a lot of indecision? Let us know what you relate to with this number. And if you're not sure if you have this number in your chart or not and would like to get a free version of your chart, as always, just head over to our website, theltvpodcast.com, to request a free PDF of your birth chart.
And as always, everybody, don't forget to like, share, subscribe to our podcast. It is the best way to support us, and we greatly appreciate it. Have a blessed day. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye.